Thank you guys for coming to the keynote presentation this afternoon. We've got some great guests up here. We're going to have a nice panel discussion today, and we're going to lead our conversation with Lauren. Lauren is with Atlanta Homes and Lifestyle, thank you, magazine, and she'll be here to lead the discussion today. Afterwards, we'll be having a toast and a book signing by this guy for advance copies of his book upstairs in Suite 313. To celebrate our 50th anniversary, as well as his new book. So come by and say hello. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the editor-in-chief, the big gal here, Lauren Iverson. She's going to take this over for you guys, but thank you for coming.
All right. Hey, everyone. Thanks for being here today to continue the conversations of the lively happenings here at Discover ADAC. We have a very insightful and power panel ahead of us that dives into what it means to design with intention, thinking more about how a space feels and functions and looks, but really dives deeper into how it impacts the community that we live in. So I'm honored to be joined by our three visionaries here who each bring a unique lens to this conversation. First, we have Rodolfo Castro. Rodolfo is the creative director of Castro Design Studio, a boutique residential design firm here in Atlanta. His work draws inspiration from traditional design of the area, interpreted with the vision of the present to create houses that are both timeless and modern. And Rodolfo is actually one of our 15 under 40 it's like the next wave of tastemakers a handful of years ago. And so it's a very small list of people who are on there, and he was one of them. So thank you, Rodolfo, for being here.
Thank you. It's a great honor.
Woo.
Hey, everybody.
Yes. Next, we have Buffy Ferguson, who's the founder of Elizabeth Ferguson Design. With 2 decades of expertise in residential and commercial interior design, she has a discerning eye and a unique perspective that she has brought to over 100 projects, which is amazing. Notably, she was a hometown designer for the West Point Downtown Development Authority and played a pivotal role in reshaping the landscape of West Point. So we are thrilled to have her here today, and just no better person.
Thank you.
Thank you, Buffy. And next, but certainly not least, Steve Nygren. Steve, along with his wife, Marie Lupo Nygren, discovered the property we all know now as Serenbe in 1991, and they relocated their family there just 3 years later. So from there, a vision was born, as we all know. The first home was built in 2004 and is now home to more than 1,000 residents and has won numerous urban land and sustainably centered awards. So thank you, Steve, for being here. Like they said, he will be signing his books, which actually are not even available yet. So if you buy one today, you get the very first copies. Right. So make sure you get one of those. So welcome, Steve.
Thank you.
All right, so this conversation is really about influence and how to use your project to spark meaningful change in your community and beyond. So to kick things off, I'd love to start with a big picture question. When you hear the phrase design for change, it can go in a plethora of directions. What does this phrase mean to you personally when it comes to your work? Steve, do you want to kick us off with that?
Absolutely. Well, we've discovered that through the years we've come into what I call rut thinking, and it's about efficiency or availability and really doesn't connect with nature. And I think that we have found post-pandemic that a lot of the research shows that some of the key things for mental health is connecting to nature and connecting to one another. And yet many of the places that we are creating for people to live and designs tend to focus on the 4 rooms of a house and not outward into nature or into the community. And so this is what Serenbe is about. I mean, it made common sense to design a lot in the way that we had done 100 years ago. And it has really brought inspiration and connectivity of people. And so while that seems very simple, that's actually design for change.
Absolutely. Buffy, what about you? What does design for change kind of mean to you in your work?
Well, I would say our philosophy in our design firm is timeless, and I think longevity. Mm-hmm. And we're designing several projects for, say, clients who want to age in place, or clients that want to pass their homes down to the next generation. So I would say design for change for us is really about sustainability. longevity, quality, and timelessness.
Definitely. Rodolfo, what about you?
I think for us, it's through our design and our work, we have the opportunity to leave this place a little better than we found it. And so that's what we do. Sometimes it's big things, sometimes it's little things, but just trying to do better for the next generation.
Definitely. Those are all very thoughtful perspectives. I want to dive a little bit deeper and get more specific on what it really means to design a home, or in Steve's case, a community that lives well within its environment. Buffy, you just mentioned aging in place. So can you share how that has come to life in your own work through maybe a specific project of like what that longevity looks like and what you're kind of instilling in these homes to make sure it's living well within its surrounding environment, aging in place, such like that?
Yeah, so just recently we completed a renovation for some clients here in the Atlanta area, that they were trying to decide if they were going to move, build a new house, but they loved the location where they, I think it's Morningside, and they love that location, they love their house, and so we just approached it from, the layout, the layout for aging in place, the selections, quality selections, timeless selections. So really that's one of my favorite things to do, is to instill those timeless quality pieces, selections in my clients' homes.
Right. And Rodolfo, you probably can relate to that a little bit in terms of, these houses and these clients, I suppose, are wanting to stay in their neighborhood, but maybe the house is not conducive to them. So what does that look like in your projects, would you say, of making sure that the houses you create for them in the same neighborhoods are still reflecting the neighborhood in the sense of it?
Sure, absolutely. So it all starts, of course, with the context and what do your neighbors' houses look like? Do you, sit back a certain distance from the street? What's the massing of the house? And really, even though it's a new house, trying to be as respectful as possible of the context, and then working to the site where we're not spending a whole bunch of time, money, effort, resources, shaping a piece of land to do something that it doesn't want to do.
Right. Well, you bring up a good point there, saying how you're looking at neighbors' houses a little bit, and kind of the context of that. Well, Atlanta, in our neighborhoods, we're lucky that you can kind of do there's so many different types of homes within the neighborhoods and stuff. So how much does that really apply, I suppose, to when you're building a new house, and how much are you taking into account maybe the surrounding houses in that sense?
I mean, really a lot, but not necessarily in a stylistic sort of way, but
Right.
more about the size of the house. And
Definitely.
you don't want to have the house that like towers over your neighbor's cute little bungalow. So how do you give a family all the spaces they want or need, and still have a house that looks like it's been there
Definitely.
forever?
Definitely. And Steve, your perspective is broader, I suppose, with having a whole community that you've had to envision. And your community is unique because it has its own hamlets that follow different styles of homes that kind of give you different neighborhoods within the same type of community. So can you share how that's come to life a little bit, and how you've assured that those hamlets have all stayed true to the Serenbe vision?
Well, once I realized I was going to be a developer, I started really looking at where are the places I loved. And as I started visiting developments, I found I came back with very few pictures, because while the design books may be very thick, it actually is a very narrow scope on what it could be. But I found places that were developed over centuries had a bigger variety of architecture. And when we lived in Ansley Park, I remember when some of the old houses, a couple of them were torn down. Everyone was panicked, and then some very contemporary houses went in. But those that stayed on the same basic massing, the same size and place, it blended beautifully, even though it was different architecture. And so we really focus heavily on what we call the placement. And so we determine where every house sits from the curb. And so we have a lot control sheet. So whether it's builders doing a group or an individual, They know exactly where that house sits and then how high it is, so what's the ridge cap. So if you're at Serenbe, you'll see the houses may flow with the street, they may do the opposite, but they all flow, and so we don't have that one up and down. So placement and massing is huge. And then for each house, we deal with light. That seems like a natural thing, but it's amazing how many times that's not the case. Or if you're facing a back alley, you have to have drapes, and we found that when we were looking at house designs, many times you don't open the back up. So for instance, the Atlanta Homes and Lifestyle that just opened, show house that just opened last week, the whole area is back, but you face, the woods and way back into the woods. So you can leave, you don't even have to have drapes because nature becomes your backdrop, and so it's really open. So that's huge. And of course, one of the biggest things at Serenbe is no lawns. And a lot of times people don't even notice that. But we were really focused on not having chemicals.
Definitely.
And so it's hard to have a beautiful lawn without having chemicals. So it's really relating to nature in light, fresh air, and then we require geothermal so that you don't have noise pollution either. So
Absolutely.
those are the key components.
Definitely. Well, one key thing about that as well is having the designers who are coming into these houses on board with that. So I want to zoom in on that key approach when it comes to kind of more biophilic design. It's a visually powerful style. You're thinking natural materials, lots of light, as you mentioned, seamless indoor-outdoor connections, but there's so much more beneath the surface. So how do you move beyond the aesthetic to make sure that those design choices truly support the environment in the way that people live? What kind of role does these thoughtful materials maybe play in making that happen? So Buffy, as our designer on the panel, do you want to kick us off with that?
Yeah, so I would say one thing that we've done is we've sourced locally. We work with local vendors, we work with local craftsmen, we use materials that are found in the area. So that's been part of really staying true to the biophilic design. Things that are not harmful long-term, the low VOCs. We're incorporating the engineered hardwood. We're incorporating the paint. We're using energy-efficient lighting, plumbing. So all of the items that, of course, the biophilic design, for a designer, those are beautiful elements, but you have to really pay attention to what makes up the beautiful elements. So
It's past
that's
the
where we've-
aesthetics. Yeah, and it's almost technical. It's why they say designers are much more than just pretty things.
And I would say, and we were talking about this earlier in our industry, it really has become the norm. So it's almost like it's expected. Our clients expect it. Our builders expect it. Our developers expect it. So.
Absolutely. Rodolfo, from an architecture standpoint, what does that look like, moving past the aesthetics to make sure that these design choices really support the environment and the way people live? I'm sure that you are experiencing the same thing where it's more expected now, but tell us more.
A lot of it is industry standard now, and at least for us, it's something we've tried to do from way back when I started decades ago.
Right.
And how Steve was saying, a lot of it just goes back to what is good design, and look at the way that things were done 100 years ago before air conditioning. And can you open up your house and get airflow and cool off? Can you open up your windows and get light? And will stuff actually live in your house? Is your house a healthy home? So like my office is full of plants. I feel it's like it makes me happy, but it also helps clean the air. So it's all about just a better quality of life.
Definitely.
And I think that comes from, a bunch of elements, but definitely a connection to nature, views, light is, there's nothing more important.
Definitely. Now, from a material standpoint, as you're saying, it's become more industry standard. So material choices, though, they're at the heart of intentional design about balancing sustainability and environmental harmony. Balancing that with client needs sometimes, or their interests, their budgets, regulations, it can be challenging. So have you run into any experience, I suppose, of having to find that balance between something that's maybe a little bit more economically stable or sustainable in that sense compared to maybe your budget's wants and desires? And how do you navigate that?
For us, it's every project, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's the perfect, and there's the great, and there's the very good, and but not one project I've ever done has an unlimited budget where we can just say, oh, do this, this, and this. So it's a lot about educating the clients on why certain materials are better than others, and then finding a balance of, like, this is a really, really good house, and you can still live in it and afford it.
Definitely. Steve, what's your take on that?
Well, I think there's so many things. One of the best examples is geothermal. We realized early on that this was a solution for our very dense areas, mostly because I didn't want the noise, and of course it cuts your heating and air conditioning by half. And then Bosch put their experience center there for 5 years. So this is going to educate everyone. And so while we encouraged people to do it, we had the education. Our builders couldn't get the bankers to fund spec houses. But then those people doing their custom houses, when it came to the final, the value engineering, it was over budget. Geothermal always got cut in favor of the marble countertops or whatever. And then when we were doing Motto, it was we had to figure this out. And so we created our own, and we had about 12 to 14% of the homes were geothermal in those days. We formed our own utility, and now we put in all of the geothermal, and everyone's required to hook up. And then for the first years, we gave the first buyer a choice. You could either sign up for our utility, and we'd send you a monthly bill, and it was going to be half of what your power would have been. Or you could buy the system and take all the credits. Well, we went from 14% buying their systems to 96% buying their systems. Because once they realized they could roll it into their mortgage, it made common sense. That we didn't give them a choice. You were going to do it. Do you want to do it this way or this way? And now we've just taken away the lease because everyone's buying it. And so there's a case where it really, the quality of having no noise in your yard and your home. In the spring when you open your windows, and instead of birds, you hear that of your ears and the neighbors and everybody, and we don't realize how that affects our nervous system.
Absolutely.
We kind of shut it out. And so that's one of the biggest things. And I think there's so many things we do that we're in that, it's just traditional. In fact, my book talks about all the unintended consequences. And no one has made decisions to have sick people and sick kids. Yet we're more depressed, more obese, and more health problems than we've ever been. And so it's time to stop and say, hey, why? And there's a lot of it, the kind of places we're designing for people to live. And that's the community, the disconnection.
Definitely. Now, for anyone in the audience, let's give a quick just education on this, I suppose, who may not know exactly kind of how geothermal works and what that is. Can you enlighten us a little and just explain what that looks like and how it's integrated into homes?
Exactly. This is using the basic temperature of water in the earth, and you can go down 200, 400 feet. And so we drill individual wells. It's generally about one well for up to 3 tons of heating and air conditioning. And then we also you can put coils in a lake. You have to be about 30 feet deep. And so it can be in a water source, and the coils are just down there. And so it's using the water. So if it's in the summer, it's cooling the water, but it's half because there's a constant temperature. and then in the winter it heats it. So you're having to take the water into just not nearly as big of a range. Our air compressors, they're having to deal with the hot air and cool it way down in the summer, and the same thing, cold air, and heat it way up in the winter. So that's why your power is twice as much. And then the air, you hear that air, where geothermal is just recirculating water in a pipe, and you never hear it. And so you don't have those big things in the yard. They generally sit in a little closet on the corner of the house. And so it's one of the most transformative systems that very few people know about or are using. Now, it's very hard to retrofit a house. I mean, it's not hard. It's more expensive because you're kind of doing a double system. For a new house, to me, it's a no-brainer.
Definitely. Well, that brings up a good point. When you're building these new houses, Buffy and Rodolfo, you're working with these builders in a lot of communities, like either in Serenbe or like Serenbe. So when you first get started on these initial meetings for new projects, what are some of the things that maybe your builder, like geothermal or something similar, may be bringing up that you have to work on from the start in relation to this ecological planning or making something a little more sustainable? Buffy, is there anything that comes to mind for you?
Well, again, for us, it's the LED lighting. It's the plumbing, the efficient plumbing, efficient appliances, locally sourced materials, stone, whether it's the stone, for the exterior of the house or interior of the house, or the steel railings, local craftsmen. So those are always, typically with our builders, are expected, and our clients expect that.
Right. You mentioned earlier something about solar panels that you're starting to implement in certain homes. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
So I worked on some homes in another development south of Atlanta, Trilith, which is an urban development, and one of the architects, Lou Oliver, he designed 14 homes, and it was the Aurora homes. And these are smaller footprints, and they're made with the exterior stucco and metal roofs, and the roofs are flat. So the clients can add optional solar panels, but they're completely energy efficient. The appliances were Energy Star appliances, geothermal, and they were great little homes because they took up such small space. The footprint was so small, and they all fed out to the green spaces, and so those were a great little project.
Right. And are you feeling like you're starting to see more of that coming up in your projects these days, of people looking for more, energy efficient, sustainable asks, I suppose, in their homes?
Yeah, and one of the things that I found that's interesting is, and I was talking to Steve about this earlier, we're going back in time, which it's like, why did we leave? Why did we go away from the way things were done before? Why did we go to the sprawl? Why did we go to the less expensive options? We've found that recently some of our projects were cutting out a lot of recessed lighting. We're using ambient lighting instead, which is, I think, leads to the more sustainable practice. But yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Rodolfo, what about you when it comes to those first initial planning meetings as you're getting together maybe with a builder or a designer? What are some of the things that they bring up maybe from an architectural standpoint that you have to be thinking about from the beginning?
I mean, geothermal actually is a big thing for us whenever we work, especially in these new urbanist communities. And it's honestly, it's just become an economic thing. It's better for the clients. The first project I ever did with that 4,000 square foot modern house, all glass, their power bill in the summer is a third of what mine is in 1,700 square feet from 1935. It's that much of a difference. So when you explain to somebody, like, it may be a little bit more upfront, but through the life of your house, it's going to pay for itself. Things like insulation, And then getting into healthier materials. A lot of, like you're saying, people get sick from living in these modern houses. And so how do we just make better choices so that your kids don't have asthma? And it's very simple if you just do a little bit of research.
Right. And what would you say some of those choices are? You know, what are some things you can swap out perhaps? Just off the top of your head, I know I'm riffing here, but
Yeah, no.
but for an example, people
Low VOC paint, formaldehyde-free plywood, paper-free drywall. The mold grows in the back of your drywall, and you don't find out until it's too late. It costs a little bit more to do it paper-free, but then you don't have to worry about that.
Definitely.
So just little things like that.
Good to know. What about you, Buffy, from a design standpoint? Maybe it comes to furniture. So what are some of those things that are easy swap outs these days that may be a little bit more upfront, like you said, but people can consider?
Well, you know, for us, we love to incorporate antiques into our projects, and I love the timelessness of that, the longevity. You know, if we can, say, repurpose items that our clients are not going to use, we love to be able to donate or resell. You know, that's one of the practices that we like to implement in our projects. Of course, the low VOC paint, the upholstery, even our budget-friendly vendors are really focusing on that now. So it's we know the ones who have the not just performance fabrics, but they're fabrics that are not going to cause long-term health risk down the road. So fortunately it's really kind of becoming a norm in our industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess my mom was right about secondhand shopping.
Yeah.
Do more of it. Steve, I want to come back to you. So, of course, we all know Serenbe and love Serenbe, and you just feel good when you're there. I don't know how to explain it other than that. It's become a model for sustainable driven community development. So I'd love if you could just tell us a little bit more about the first seeds, both literally, I suppose, and metaphorically, that rooted your vision of Serenbe. What's its origin story?
Aha. Well, a lot of people knew me as the restaurateur back in the days. I see it. There's enough people with gray hair or something that remember that. And I know some of the younger ones had prom there or came for junior high events. But we sort of stepped off the treadmill of Atlanta to raise our kids out in the country, to connect with it. And then when, in my 7th year of retirement, when we realized that the urban sprawl was coming out, I remember my 3rd restaurant was the Public House in Roswell, and I had to drive through 4 miles of country to get there. And we saw how fast it had disappeared. So I know when development it's 100 acres, it's 200 acres at a time. And so my panic when I realized that the developers were starting to look at the last available land, last affordable land in Metro Atlanta, was the basically 40,000 acres in south tip of Fulton County. Now it was still there because no one wanted to live down there. The schools were terrible. There were no roads down there. Nobody even knew about where it was. But we found that paradise that we could still get into the center of the city in 35, 40 minutes. And so I didn't want to move another hour out because we still liked all the things the city had to offer. And I realized I couldn't buy our way out of it. At 900 acres, I had to stop showing up at all those closings. And that really didn't do it. And so I just stepped back for that common sense. And how can, I could not bring enough environmentalists. So all of the environmental organizations, they were busy in front of the bulldozers up north, the Conservation Fund, Trust for Public Land, Nature Conservancy. And so we had to find a solution that, why shouldn't development trigger preservation? Common sense. 100 years ago, the person developing also lived on the land, cared about the land, and they weren't going to grade it and destroy it. because they were going to be there. And we moved away from that. And so during our retirement, we took the kids to England a lot. And after World War II, they put good land laws in because the island was only so big. They couldn't afford urban sprawl. And so we became fascinated with English land law. Now try to bring that to a property rights southern state. And all the professionals thought we were nuts. But Ray Anderson, many of you know, is the great environmentalist, was a dear friend of ours. In fact, Quinn's godfather was his stepson. And so we've seen him through the whole thing. And so I said, Ray, certainly you know somebody that can help. And 25 years ago, September of 2000, Ray brought the Rocky Mountain Institute in, and 23 thought leaders really started talking about all the issues. Well, I was a little depressed because none of them were really applying this. None of them were going to help me save my backyard. And so sharing that with Ray, and if any of you knew Ray, he had a way of just, okay, well, go see this person and go see that person. And about 6 months later, I came back and I said, Ray, there's got to be somebody applying all this stuff to the local. And he said, there isn't, that's why you need to. And so that was the beginning of how we did this. And so we spent 2 years bringing 500 landowners together. And it was one of the largest zoning changes in Metro Atlanta, in changing 60 square miles. Basically, we stopped zoning. Now, I took our land to prove that this made sense. All the professionals thought we were nuts. Thank goodness we didn't have to pay any of them. We only worked with universities. So the Rocky Mountain Institute helped me find Phil Tabb, who did his doctorate on the English village system. And he was the head of architecture at Texas A&M. So Texas A&M came in. The University of Georgia land and real estate, they did a lot of our legal work as a model, and that was to change state law for transfer development rights. Georgia Tech did a lot of work, and so we were strictly worked with universities as models, and we continue to this day to do that because when you're out front, many times ideas look crazy, and I talk to students, and while there's idealism, many of the people who have had idealism when they come out, between regulations, clients, perceptions, suddenly we step away and away and away from what we know better. And I think that's one of the big issues we have today is just doing what makes more sense. For nature and for each other is a huge difference. And I think once we tie it to our health, we have 240 kids there full time, not one reported sign of asthma, statistically impossible. And there's story after story about health benefits. So it's a lot about the built environment, and Serenbe is standing up as a model for that. And we're recognized by the Global Wellness Summit. So it's amazing just to save our own backyard. Now we're becoming a global model.
Definitely, definitely. It's a beautiful story. I love it, yeah.
It shows you there's a huge lack of common sense in the world today.
Well, with every beautiful story like that, there does come challenges to get to the happy ending. So what kinds of challenges have you faced building this community to make it what it is in the last few decades, I suppose?
Well, the biggest thing, I mean, we had a lot of wonderful editorials about this incredible zoning. I mean, this just doesn't exist in the United States. We're saving 70% of the land. Nowhere in the United States is doing that through zoning. And so I thought, wow, this is going to be great when we're going to do our own community. And so we did these great boxes. After developing the restaurants for all these years, I swore I was never going to borrow money again. I enjoyed not having to worry about those bank payments. And so I was going to bring investors in and do all this. Well, to my surprise, and they've since told me how hard they laughed, the idea that I was building a community out here in the forest in South Fulton County. I look back, of course, it was crazy. But at this point, I was in the passion. Now, thank goodness, I believed in Midtown Atlanta in the 70s when everyone else thought that was just parking lots and bars and prostitutes, which it was in the 70s. But it was also in the center, and it had the grid, and it just made a lot of sense. And even though people drove from Buckhead to their offices downtown, nobody saw that jewel. And so, that of course is where my first restaurant was, because I could afford it, not because I had that vision. And then we ended up, doing the mix next door and bought the building, and then the country place. And so Midtown was a heart, and there was so much going on there. And so I became head of the Midtown Alliance, bought lots of property. We changed the zoning to walkable in the 80s, and that was as crazy as nature forward is today. And last year, that square mile in Midtown was the most active, high-valued real estate in America. But thank goodness, because of me buying that in the 70s, I was able to sell and leverage that, and ended up having to do it on our own dime to actually build Serenbe, because everybody thought it was crazy. So financing is the hardest thing. Now, our people can get mortgages for any price house, literally. We have we have spec houses for $2 million. I never guessed I would find that, especially those that have still the vision of South Fulton County. But now it's Serenbe and the Chattahoochee Hills. But I still have trouble with the finance community doing office buildings. Same thing. We wanted to build a great place for our medical, and we've got this whole, we've got doctors and dentists and everything there. And I had to sell a half acre on Peachtree Street, where the peasant headquarters was, to build the 2,300 square foot, because no bank would even loan us the money to do it. And it is the only Class A office building south of I-20 in Fulton County. That's hard to believe. Mm-hmm. But it's the bankers and the financial community wants feasibility studies. They're looking in the rearview mirror, and so when you're out there in front of the windshield going through, it's hard for anybody to do innovative things. And this is why we keep doing the same thing. It isn't because everybody wants to do the same thing. It's because the only way you can fund it.
Definitely. Thank you. Wow. I love it. Well, Serenbe has certainly become, an example of these sustainable communities, and I know that a lot of different communities throughout the country have started to take some inspo from them. Rodolfo, I'm going to come to you next on this, but your work takes you across the country, and each project is shaped by kind of its own geography, climate, cultural context, such like that. So as the conversation around sustainability and biophilic design has evolved over the past decade, how has that influenced or shifted maybe your personal design philosophy? And can you share any examples of how that's showing up in your work today?
I think, good design is good design no matter where you are. I've always, and I tell people I probably need to work through this in therapy, but I get very claustrophobic, and so for me, fresh air and light, I have to have it, otherwise I'm miserable. Mm-hmm. So we do that everywhere we go. But every town is different, every community is different, and I think just out of respect for what's there, you owe it to them to go and spend a good amount of time just seeing what is there, how do people live, what's the scale of the environment around you, and try to work to that. Still bring your own viewpoint and the tastes of your clients, of course, but I think we just need to do better for our neighbors no matter where we work. So it's just about that.
Definitely. Buffy, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit there, too, about your design philosophy. And as you've done projects, in these communities, whether it be in Serenbe or at Trilith, like you've mentioned, how perhaps yours has evolved as you've worked more within these communities and seen firsthand how they're kind of steamrolling their way through these sustainable environments and creating better communities for people.
Yeah, so a lot of what we have found recently in the years, most recent years working in Trilith and Serenbe, is bringing nature, which is of course is biophilic design, but bringing nature inside or connecting. So we just recently completed actually the house that was on the July cover in Trilith. That house was fantastic because it had multiple outside spaces. And the loggia was one of our favorite spots because our client's garden is connected to the loggia. And so it really just is such a beautiful space to spend time. It has the beautiful stonework, the timbers, and all of and again, the local craftsmanship, beautiful steel railing. So love incorporating the sustainable items, the local craftsmen, the quality selections in our projects, and that was one of the projects I think that we're most proud of, and I really enjoyed working on, able to incorporate those.
Beautiful. That project is in the presentation somewhere here, so we'll point it out if it passes by. I want to leave some time for audience questions, so this will be the last for me, but as we think about the future of design and where we're headed, I'd love to look ahead a little bit more. If we gathered again in 10 years, what's one change that you hope will be standard practice in how we design our homes and our communities? Who wants to kick us off? Steve, you want to go first?
Well, absolutely. The hope is that we're designing homes in walkable communities. We're moving into a society, whether it's autonomous cars. How many 20-year-olds don't have driver's licenses and could care less about owning that car that we all thought was so important? I mean, they're wise enough to know they can have a chauffeur. We still think it's independence. They found independence not having to worry about a car mortgage and insurance. I mean, there is a different philosophy. And I'm afraid we're building places that are still in yesteryear's model. I was a few years ago, I was at both TED and the Urban Land Institute. And they asked, I remember at the Urban Land Institute, and there's about 4,000 developers out there. And they said, how many of you were building golf courses in the 80s and 90s? And of course, the hands went up all over. Well, and that was because all the bankers realized the premium. And so developers found out if you just tell the bank you're going to do a golf course, they'll give you the funding. So, the whole thing, it had nothing to do with the golf courses. It was the view that people were buying them. But anyhow, they said, well, how many of you are redeveloping your golf courses now? And half the hands went back up. And they said, well, those of you that are developing parking garages or auto-dependent communities should think about how you're going to reuse it. Because in 20 years, those parking facilities are going to be the same thing as your dysfunctional, abandoned golf courses today. And so all the trends are showing that this is where we're headed. And so I think that's the big future, is where can people walk? I mean, one of the greatest things we have is the connection of people running into neighbors on the way to get their mail and what have you, not at the end of the thing. And so many of our homes are built so that you drive the car into the garage, you go in, you need something, you go back and get in the car and you go get it. And we never go out our front door many times. And so that's I think, the big thing that we're going to see. And so my hope is that we have a lot more of that in 10 years from now.
Definitely. Beautiful. Buffy, what about you? What's something that you hope is standard practice in the next 10 years?
Quality, timeless. Mm-hmm. That would be something that I would like to see across the board for our clients and our builders, developers, to recognize how important it is. And without a doubt, walkability. I mean, I'm a new urbanism baby. I love it. So I love the concept of, and I, you mentioned that I worked on the West Point Downtown Development Authority, and I went to Andre Swanee spoke, and just the thought of everything being right there. You don't need to get in your car. You don't need to drive. Everything is right there. Your school, your grocery store, your restaurant, your work. I feel like it is pushing. It is getting further. Developments like Serenbe, developments like Trilith are really helping with that, but that's what I'd like to see.
Definitely. Rodolfo?
I hope that we go back to thinking about buildings like people used to way back then, and it's not something that you're going to resell or flip in 5 years or whatever, but these places are supposed to outlive us, and so build them that way and treat them that way.
Definitely. Love it. Well, thank you guys. We will open it up for audience questions, but first I do have 2 announcements before we run off to our innovations showroom. So first thing, just for being here, thank you so much. We are giving away 4 tickets to the Serenbe Show House with Atlanta Homes and Lifestyles. So we will email you if you won. Yay. And second, each of you has a bookmark in the magazine that was sitting on your seat. And if you scan that QR code, you can be entered to win a giveaway of a 1-year subscription to Atlanta Homes and Lifestyles, as well as 2 tickets to our upcoming Home for the Holiday Show House. So make sure you do that. And good luck. Okay, we're going to open it up for some audience questions. If anyone has something for our panelists.
And please wait till we get to you with the microphone because we are recording.
I'll do that one. Yeah.
Hi. Approximately how much for like a 4,000 square foot house would a geothermal system kind
Would
of
what?
run these days?
Geothermal system?
Yes.
Generally, it tends to be like 20% more, and that's your upfront cost from other traditional system. But then,
What would that financial number be, like 80,000?
well,
or?
it depends on your system and the size house. You know, it's how much light, how many windows face south versus north. There's so many things that determine the tonnage of your air. But generally, it's about $3,000 per ton. So it depends on how many ton you're doing. And of course, now up until now, there's been a lot of tax breaks, and so it's like a bonus that when you do your taxes, that you get all that back. Plus, no matter it really changes. I think about when Bosch did their experience center there, and it was certified. It was geothermal and solar. Now that cost about 18 to 20% more to build, and so everybody's you can't do that. Well, we presume, yes, it was more expensive, but when they got their mortgage, like 70, 80% mortgage, the increased monthly payment was less than what their power bill would have been. So it was cash flow positive, month 1. And so many times, even the companies talk about the 5-year, 7-year payback. We're not looking at cash flow.
Thank you for looking outside the box and building with that passion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have one over here.
Hello, I really appreciated what you shared today. I really did appreciate your vision of what future communities can look like and should look like. But my concern is what our current communities, how they operate. When you're dealing with widespread suburban sprawl, how do you make them walkable again? How do you make them sustainable? Is there any way you can retrofit communities?
Absolutely.
So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I think it depends where, but it was interesting. We had someone who was moving back to Atlanta, and they had a contract on a suburban house, and they came to an event at Serenbe, and he just, it felt differently, and he couldn't figure out why, and so then 2 weeks later they came back, and it felt different. He couldn't figure out why, and they had 2 small children, and so he went back to the house they had a contract on, and he went out on the back deck, and it was set up on a hill, and he looked out, and he said, "Oh my God, I was about to put my kids in a prison without realizing it. I saw every perfect backyard with a perfect fence around it and their own play equipment." So my suggestion for all your neighborhoods that have that is tear down all the back fences and let the kids run free. And you can put in gardens, you can put in common play, right? And instead of sending our elders off to these prisons, I call them cruise ships to death. Let's figure out how to keep them in the neighborhoods. At Serenbe, you're going to see free-range kids and uncaged elders all over the place. And I think we can do that in any community, that we just have to really think about changing it. And one of the biggest challenges is going to be, how do you bring services in so you don't have to get in a car to go everywhere? How do you have the small grocer? How do you have that? But it's all possible. There's intersections. You see a lot of people, places are changing those big malls that aren't working any longer. And how do you make those, how do you just simply do trails? Look at the Beltline. People are walking from neighborhood to neighborhood that they never imagined walking to, because, if you can get pedestrian paths a lot easier than the roads. So you just have to start rethinking about how those communities are. One of my favorite things to talk about is our stormwater. And how many people can imagine how the raindrop that fits on your roof gets to the local streams and the rivers? Can anybody imagine how that is, what that path is? Very few people, because we've been burying it. So imagine, and in a lot of your older cities, the infrastructure is breaking down. If you daylight it, that means that it's in open trenches and bioretention swells. So imagine if our whole neighborhoods had sort of a vein of green networks going out, and you can do paths along it and edible. And so that's one of the huge things, no matter where, no matter how urban it is. Malmo, Sweden is a very urban city, and you see all the stormwater running in open trenches and ditches, and it just transforms how you think about things. So there's a lot of ways you can do it. I talk about that in our book. It's how any community can really change. We just have to have the power to think differently.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. Okay.
Good afternoon. After 23 years, I was a chef, and I just switched over to, I'm now an urban farmer and a garden consultant here in Atlanta, Georgia. And my question for you two specifically is, do you see a future for a partnership between builders and interior design, or anything like that? Because I'm kind of going through just networking and showing up and getting to build gardens, but do you see a future for that with the builders? Because right now I'm just hearing no, we don't need that, as far as the community garden, or actually just raised bed gardens in the actual homes.
100%. There's a big movement to tear out your yard and put in a garden, whether it's for pollinators or for food. We've had several clients that have actually done that. Mostly started out of just necessity and different allergies and sensitivities and things like that. But I 100% think there is a big market for that, actually. Most of our houses now have raised beds that people just love to, even if it's not everything you eat, but some things. It's better for you. It's easier to maintain than a green yard. So yes, maybe not in a giant suburban neighborhood, but in town, I think, for sure.
Certainly. Thank you.
All right. Just in time. That's perfect. Thank you. Great closing. All right, we're going to take the party upstairs to Suite 313. That's Innovations. We will, yes, be doing a book signing with Steve, so you want to get a copy of that, where we will also be celebrating Innovations' 50th anniversary, as well as their grand reopening of their beautiful renovated showroom. So let's go upstairs, and we'll celebrate with everybody up there. Thank you so much for being here today.